Welcome everyone. My name's Russell Fitzpatrick. I'm a councillor down at Bega Valley Shire, and the Save Bombala people asked me whether I'd come and chair the meeting tonight, and I was honoured to do it. Just so you got a bit of background of me, I'm third term Bega Valley Shire councillor. Been on the council now for 10 years, and also I'm on the Southern New South Wales Health Board, so I'm not prepared to go into any health questions tonight. That on Southern New South Wales Health, that covers Bombala, Delegate Shires, as well as Cooma, and also down the coast. So thanks, and I'd like to acknowledge my fellow old board member on Southern New South Wales Health, Senator Thaler, who's here tonight, and also welcome all the candidates, including the Deputy Premier John Barilaro, Peter Marshall from the Greens, Bryce Wilson from Labor, Mick Holton from Fishers and Shooters, and Andrew Thaler, who's running as an independent. Acknowledge and welcome them and thank them for their attendance to start with. Just a few rules I've outlined. Some of you might have thought it was going to be 10 minutes. I thought at 10 minutes with 5 speakers and a couple of other things, we'll all be asleep by an hour and a half. So we've actually cut it back to 7 minutes for speakers. So at 5 minutes, I'll get a warning. Some probably might want to go the full 7 minutes. We want to stick to the issue that's in front of us that the Save Bombala people have put up. So any questions, if we can make sure they're around it. What I want to particularly harp on, and I'll be particularly strong on as the chairman, is we're not here to bash the old council, the new council, or the current setup. It's here to work out how Bombala can either push for a plebiscite to go alone back to a single shire. So if we can stick to that part of the rule, I know it's passionate and everyone gets emotional about it, and we're all pretty patriotic for our hometowns. I'm no different for Pambula, where I come from, so let's all keep it to what the rules are and keep it to that. And if any personal criticisms, I just won't have it from anyone, either from the people speaking or from the crowd. So anyone who does that will just be cut off. So I hate to be rude about it, but that's just the way I like to chair a meeting. I don't think we have to denigrate to that, and I don't think it does you or the contestants any favours by denigrating other people. So that's my personal rules as chair, and I'll hand over to Penny to say from the Save Bombala group.
Good evening. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians, past and present, of the Narragansett land upon which we stand at the moment. Welcome to this watershed meeting in the future of our district. The group Save Bombala Inc was recently formed in response to the rising sense of frustration being experienced by local people. A frustration with our large regional council, which has taken over a small local council through an amalgamation process. They were promised economies of scale, efficiencies, a rosy future, but we've only seen huge rate increases, loss of jobs and services, and a lack of interest in local concerns. Can this be changed? Big question. This meeting was called to gauge public and political support for seeking change, see if we can take back control of the future of our community. The 5 candidates for the upcoming state election will outline their positions on a plebiscite or a referendum, which would give the people of the old Bombala Council area a chance, which was denied them in 2016, to say what council entity should govern them. It's not, and I'll repeat what Russell said, this is not a bash the council forum. We are here to discuss a plebiscite, to discuss whether we're going to decide we would like to demerge our council. We are here to decide if we are going to take positive action. Save Bombala Inc and our proposals are first steps in a process that many other small councils are following. If you wish to be a part of our new group, which will fight for the Bombala area, please fill in the expression of interest at the end of the meeting. Also, we hope at the end of the meeting we will be putting a motion to ask whether we should go ahead with first of all we would have to have a petition and then the petition can call for a plebiscite. So that will be going at the end of the meeting, after you've heard everyone speaking, after you are able to make up your mind. Please listen carefully to all of the candidates' points of view and make your mind up for that. Do we want to take action? Thank you.
Thanks, Penny. First of all, there's one candidate who's not here tonight. It's Frankie Seymour from the Animal Justice candidate, and he released a statement that I'll read out to everyone here, and I'll probably do that now first before the others wish to speak. The Animal Justice Party has no particular policy on council amalgamations, since at face value the issue has no direct impact on animals. However, on matters where we have no specific policy, we are required to be guided by values of kindness, equality, rationality and non-violence, which naturally dispose us to oppose government actions which impose changes on people against their will. On this particular issue, I'm also personally strongly motivated to support the emerging of any councils where residents demand it. My home council of Queanbeyan was recently forcibly amalgamated with Thaler Council. Being vastly outnumbered by the residents of much more populous Queanbeyan, many, perhaps most Thaler residents felt their needs and priorities will be swamped and overwhelmed by amalgamation. The damage, however, is now noticeable in both communities, where once if I came across a gushing water main or oil pollution in the river, I could report it and get immediate action. Now I have to spend an hour on the phone trying to find anyone who actually has a clue what I'm talking about when I try to give directions to the location of the problem. This is a consequence of the size and complexity of the bureaucracy needed to manage both councils. To my mind, the mergers were, for the most part, false economies of which residents are now paying. If I am asked, I will support the merger of councils that were merged against the will of the residents, or where residents are now finding the mergers to be destructive or the effective management of their communities. So that's the Animal Justice candidate Frankie Seymour's comments on the issue. First speaker tonight will be Andrew Thaler. He'll have 5 minutes. Bill will go at 2 minutes. If we could leave all questions until after all 5 speakers have presented, that would be appreciated. And if you could respect the speakers as they go through. Thank you. You may not always agree with some of the comments from any particular speaker, so I just ask that you keep those comments to yourself and respect their wishes and views. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Andrew Thaler. I have stood previously in the federal elections, and so my name might be familiar, and until the Monaro Post stopped reporting about me and my engagement with the council, you would have had the benefit of reading how much I have tried to stand up for our areas, and I say our as in Bombala and Cooma. Before the amalgamation, my focus was obviously the Cooma Shire because I live at Nimitabel. And throughout the previous election, 2016, the 2015 state election, I did have a lot more to do with Bombala and even Delegate and the wider region. I have always opposed council amalgamation. I never ever saw the promise ever sort of coming to a fruition or to a fulfilment. Even with the councils that we had, there were always frustrations, there were always limits to budgets, limits to manpower. And I felt that if you merge the councils, you are increasing the distance that they must cover, which consequently puts a stress on the machinery that they are then using. Now our Shire, now and previously, has a large amount of ungraded roads, or unsealed roads, which require grading, and it's a perennial problem. We've also been beset with water issues, which everyone is abundantly familiar with. All I can say here is that you're not alone. If you look at the newspapers, Yass has worse problems with water than Bombala does at the moment. And so it requires a common approach. And to that end, that is the role of state government. Local government should deal with local issues, keeping the streets clean, footpaths maintained or building footpaths, curb and guttering where appropriate, and water, rubbish, sewerage, and general basic planning issues. In a local sense, the benefit there being that you can have an easier engagement with your councillors and the council staff who are living in your community. as we see now, I'll catch him. As we see now, the council workers are coming from shires that don't have any of that familiarity with yours, with your town. So people coming from Jindabyne, people coming from Cooma. And that feeds a growing sense of frustration. Now in Nimitabel, we've always been part of the Cooma Shire, and straw poll in Nimitabel, you'd find that we would like to join Bombala. So, as I understand it now, the choice is pretty simple, and it's your choice. Yes, there's an election where you get to choose candidates to represent you, but this is a state election, and these are decisions on state issues and how that impacts you here. With regard to a plebiscite for a council, it's a much simpler choice. What would you rather? Would you rather have your own council, or would you rather stay with a bigger council and take a bit of a punt that it might get better? That's the problem that I see. It might get better. And we've seen that no amount of money thrown at a problem will ever solve the problem. It's a matter of keep it local, keep the solutions local. So I'm a big believer in local council. You're lucky because you're not splitting a council and having to then build a council chambers and start from scratch. You're just trying to return to what you were. You've already got the council. Now, I've spoken to a lot of people in Bombala and been quite blunt and frank. There was always some dissatisfaction with some of the councillors and the decisions made. If you demerge, you get to choose a new council of and from yourselves. And that's an important step. You bring everything back to your control. And I would commend that as an option, because it is a beautiful town in a beautiful region. It does have a future. You've got a sawmill, you've got the forest industry, the tourist industry is growing, you've got a wind farm providing community money. You have all of the building blocks to continue to be in control of your future. Let the state government sort out the bigger issues, and your council keep on top of your issues. Now, referring quickly in a bit of research to the Bombala public meetings in May and June 2015, John Barilaro was recorded saying there will be no forced amalgamations, but the state government want to partner with local government to change. Thank you. John has said tonight, and I commend him for that, that he's here to face the music, so to speak. What he said and what occurred are two different things, and I don't want to harp on that because it's pretty bloody obvious. He also said the community needs to be at the centre of this decision. There is no benefit. If there is no benefit, there is no point in amalgamating. And he was quite supportive of the rural council model. Now, the rural council model is where the individual smaller councils can work together. So the last thing that I can say is that the mechanics of a de-amalgamation are fairly simple. You would need to put up a petition consisting of 10% of the electors in the former council area. That's not hard to do. Now, that doesn't mean you will de-amalgamate. That means you will commence the process to consider de-amalgamating. That process includes an audit of the council now, from the point of amalgamation through administration to the recently formed council, and you would be given a plan and a cost of what it would involve to de-amalgamate. And then you would have to choose. This first step is an important step. I think you have to do it irrespective of your broader thoughts. You really should take the step, and to hell with what Jindabyne and Cooma think. They are entitled to take their steps too. So don't think you can't do it because of what Jindabyne has got a plan within an amalgamated shire that is causing friction against Cooma. So we've got an amalgamated shire to homogenise planning, but we've got Jindabyne on its own planning pathway. It's causing a lot of friction. So take the step, put up your 10% or more, go through the process, and then you'll be at a position where you can make a final choice, but be fully informed.
Thank you, As I said, if we can keep all questions, if you've got questions, let's keep them to the end after we've heard all 5 speakers. Thank you. Next one up is Mick Holton from Shooters and Fishers.
Shooters, Fishers and Farmers. Thank you. All right. Okay, so first thing I want to say, look, thanks very much for having me here. This is an exciting time for me to get around and meet people and talk to you about how I can help you guys, be a strong voice for you guys, particularly in this topic. I want to point out that the party, although often attacked for many things in campaigning, but I want to make it pretty clear to you that we've been fighting for you guys long before it's got to this point, long before the amalgamation occurred, and the party has been watching out for you guys. I will show you an example from a bill 2017, and I'm happy to talk to anyone separately later on about this material. This particular material was introduced by the Honourable Robert Borsak. So Shooters, Fishers and Farmers in the upper house. And it's the Local Government Amendment Amalgamations Referendums Bill 2017. Now, we've got a member, Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party member in Orange, Phil Donato, who's been very proactive and doing a lot of good work there. He actually, in the Legislative Assembly, I've got a paper here, a Hansard, where he's actually talking to this bill, and I just want to read to you one little paragraph here. This is Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party looking out for you guys. The object of the bill is to amend the Local Government Act 1993 to provide that plebiscites are to be conducted to ascertain whether the electors of the local government areas amalgamated during 2016 wish the amalgamations to be reversed, and certain proposed amalgamations of local government areas are not to proceed unless approval for the amalgamation has been given by the electors of each of the areas concerned at a referendum. There's a lot more to this, and you can get this information online to see how we've supported you guys. I will like to point out that when that was voted on the floor there was a difference of 9 votes. It would have only taken 9 votes to get this across the floor, to get this approved. And I have to say, Mr. Barilaro's name is on here. With all due respect, at that point in time, he didn't believe that was something he wanted to support. But again, not wanted to make any personal attacks in this campaign. I think it's very important for us to stand up and be counted for what we believe in. If you guys are looking for my support as a candidate, I'm supporting a democratic view. So if you guys want that opportunity, you've got my full support. Right? I have spoken to people around the state, because my business takes me right around the state, who in certain areas, their amalgamations have worked out. But it's important to me that your voice is heard. And it's important to me to let you know that this party that I've aligned myself to looks at a whole lot of stuff, not just shooting and fishing and farming. All right? It's a very important thing, and I'm proud to be part of that. I would like to let you know a little bit about me, because it ties very closely to where you're at right now. A little bit about bureaucracy, something that frustrates the heck out of me. I'm also president of the Volunteer Firefighters Association. That's a magazine we produce. Some of you might know me from my time with the Rural Fire Service when I was staff, and I worked here. I came here and worked with the locals here. I'm actually ex-Fire Rescue New South Wales as well, so some of the retained in town may know of me. In an RFS context, many of you may agree with me that when the Rural Fire Service became one big state-based entity and started to run the show from Sydney, we lost a lot of good people. People got frustrated with bureaucracy. Bigger isn't always better. We lost that local input from people because we started to run the stuff of rural people who ran your business from Sydney. And that's what's happening under the current government, that we're being manipulated by city Liberals. I can see that happening in a lot of areas. And let me tell you something about that bureaucracy. You talk to locals about the simplicity of building a fire shed. And they'll say, oh gee, we could have built that fire shed for 150,000, even if they're being conservative, it might blow out to 200. But the RFS comes along and the bill gets to 360, 400, the colours are selected, the locals don't get a look into it. Now this is a very similar parallel. I'm drawing some conclusions here about how the position you're in now. So what I can do for you guys, as a candidate, if I'm successful through my party, is be a strong voice to stand up for what you believe is right and make sure it's democratic. All right, so that's what this party's all about, and I'm really proud to be here and represent you for a way forward. So thank you very much.
The next speaker will be you, Bryce. Peter from the Greens, Peter Marshall from the Greens. Thanks, Peter. 7 minutes, mate. You know the rules.
Thank you, Russell. First, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the land of the Monaro people, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. And thank you very much to Save Bombala for inviting me down here. I'll get to the question in a second, but first of all, some context about me. I'm a councillor. I think I'm the only person sitting at this table who's a councillor on a council in this region at the moment. I'm a councillor on Queanbeyan-Palerang Regional Council, which is a merged council. I was a councillor on Palerang Council from 2012 until May 2016, when it was merged, and then I was sacked. I wasn't appointed to one of the plum positions in the local representation committee, probably because I was a bit of a refusenick. So I opposed the forced amalgamation of Queanbeyan and Palerang Council back then. I opposed forced amalgamation of all the councils that were being forced. I moved that our council join the legal fight, and the council majority in my council declined to do that for fear that it wouldn't be successful and would cost a lot of money. Well, the councils that did join that legal fight won, though I believe some of them are being punished a little bit for having won now. So, on the question of a plebiscite, there's no answer but yes. How can you not support a plebiscite on the mergers? It doesn't have to even be about demerging. The current government, if re-elected, could portray it, promote it as an endorsement of the actions they've already taken. You can run it, the council election in September 2020, virtually for free. It'll be another bit of paper. There simply is no argument against plebiscite on the forced mergers. So, why do I personally oppose the merged councils? Because I see this, my party sees this, as a gradual chipping away at the local government. Here in the regions, we have had our local governments literally taken away, and your local government is now in Cooma, and I think possibly meets in Jindabyne sometimes. I don't think it comes here. That's not very local for you. But in other parts of the state, and particularly in Sydney Metro, they've actually taken a lot of the planning powers away from councils. So the councillors don't get to decide the contentious DAs. Not even the 25 million and up ones that already went to the joint regional planning panels, not the even bigger ones that go to the Planning Assessment Commission, but any contentious DA is decided by a local planning panel, which is a group of people appointed by the state government. So your councillors would not even have a say in those DAs. Doesn't matter how many people object, get the councillors' ears, the councillors can't decide those DAs. So those have been rolled out in Sydney. I can only assume they're going to come to the regions. What starts there comes out here. So I'm very concerned that that's another way in which the state government is chipping away at the local and local government. And the current state government speaks very fondly of things like nuclear power, genuinely, because our local member was off in the USA a year or two ago looking into nuclear power, and that would mean that if somebody wanted to put a nuclear power station in your council area, your councillors won't have any say. It'll all be done in Sydney. Yes, I'm scaremongering, but that'll happen to somebody if there's a nuclear power station in this state. What happens with coal-fired power stations is that, again, already the local communities do not have any say. So I'm not just talking about plebiscites on rolling back mergers, I'm talking about rolling back planning powers, to give planning powers back to the local communities where they belong. I want to apologise briefly to our Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party candidate there for laughing during his talk, because I wasn't laughing at him, I was laughing at something he said. The fire station across the road from my house has gone through exactly that process. What started out as what was going to be a couple of $100,000 is now, I understand, 650,000, and the state government has very generously filled that funding gap. But the state government has been very generous in the last 6 months or so, and not so much in the few years before that. So we're seeing a lot of largesse, and perhaps particularly in the merged council areas, to make them look good. Your council, I think, got $15 million to spend on community projects. My council got $10 million. People think, wow, our new council's rolled out this new park, this new playground, they've expanded the sports centre. Nothing to do with the merger. I call it the merger bribe. It was the money given to the councils to make them look like they're performing better. So we also got an administrator appointed by the state government for that period of 16 months before the new council election, as I believe you did. We were the only two councils, Queanbeyan and Palerang and Snorri Monaro Council, who got appointed the former mayor of one of those councils as an administrator. Some of the others were lucky enough to get former government ministers or opposition spokespersons, members of the National Party. A lot of them were functionaries, bureaucrats, people from outside the area. We got mayors. We got mayors who, certainly in our council area, prosecuted their own agenda, approved things they couldn't get through the council, the elected council beforehand, and that they probably suspected he wasn't going to get through the elected council after an election. So he approved it. He committed funds, which we're going to have rate increases to fund the expenditure decisions made during the administration period. There is so much wrong with the forced mergers, there's so much wrong with how they've been done. We've never been given the reasons, we've never been given the financials. One day we'll know, I hope, but until then, for now, we can push for our demerger plebiscites. So I won't wait for the bell. Thank you.
We'll just leave questions last, because I have a few questions based on a few of those statements. Next up is Bryce Wilson, the Country Labor candidate. And we'll welcome Bryce.
Good evening, how are you? Thank you for having me here tonight. I'd like to start by adding my voice to the acknowledgement to Country that was at the start of the, and also pay my respects to elders, both past and present, but also the emerging leaders of the local community. Look, I think it's important that we, without raking over old coals, but it is important to think about how we got here. Why are we in this basketball stadium of Bombala High talking about getting our council back? Well, it happened on March 17, nearly 4 years ago, where we had a promise there'd be no forced mergers, and I'm sure there's people in the room that took that at someone's word and actually voted on the back of that. And then we had a situation where a forced merger was chopped on after a consultation process that drove everyone mad, and then when asked in Parliament why the member for Monaro decided not to overrule the forced mergers, he said, well, we had the smallest turnout of any of the local government consultation processes. So, and then as a result, we got rammed through, we haven't seen the evidence, and here we are tonight. So we're all here for those reasons, and there's been a lot said, and there'll be probably reminders made, but it's good to reflect on how we got here. So looking forward, which is really what tonight's about, and I should actually probably start also by acknowledging the Honourable Bronnie Thaler at the back, and John as well, being the elected representatives. So we move forward. Labor has a clear policy on demerging. Despite all the colour and movement, it's pretty simple. Labor does not believe in forced mergers. It doesn't believe in forced demergers. We believe in a process, and our policy is, and it's been through our conference, and it's quite important, previous speakers have talked about this will happen and you just have to plebiscite or whatever. Well, actually, you actually have to change the government to get a plebiscite process, which is Labor's policy, based on the Queensland model, of 10% of the population, and then of the affected area, petitioning. And then our Shadow Minister has said they'd form a panel to put everything on the table, so people are fully informed when they then go and make that plebiscite vote. If there was a plebiscite vote, it would be the Shadow Minister's intention, which would become the Minister, of course, to then legislate that the result of that vote, the local government minister would have to accept. So people fully informed make a democratic decision. And so we were informed by the Queensland model. However, I do note, and I stress this again, Labor needs to be in government for that to happen. So if you go at the end of the night and you keep pressing forward down this process, we actually have to have a government that's sympathetic and actually has a legislative agenda to take that forward. And so on that front, I have a freshly minted letter from Michael Daly, the Leader of the Opposition, to the Bombala community, which I could read, but effectively says what I've just said. I'm going to table this. If anyone, I have a few copies. I don't have the resources of a big office, but I have a few copies, and I'll table it and I'll give it to the Monaro Post and the Bombala Times and the ABC, anyone else is here, and it's to the community. And it makes quite clear that if Labor has committed, if we achieve government, to putting in place a transparent mechanism to enable voluntary demerging of councils that were forcibly merged by the Baird and Berejiklian government. Mechanisms for council mergers already exist in many other jurisdictions in Australia and overseas. In Queensland, for instance, many forcibly merged councils have voluntarily demerged over several years. I'll just finish with the last paragraph, and that is, in government, we would look closely at how Queensland and other models work to ensure that we legislate the best possible system for New South Wales communities. We would also ensure that we consult closely with organisations such as Local Government New South Wales and other key stakeholders. Now, I'm happy to take questions when we get to that section, but I'll leave you with this. This is possible. What happened was wrong, and if you do decide to move forward and you want to start the process of petition, it is possible. Big problems can be solved. And if I'm elected the member for Monaro, if I'm lucky enough to do that and have that privilege, I will work tirelessly to take that process forward. Thank you very much.
The next speaker I'll just welcome is the Honourable John Barilaro, Deputy Premier, Minister for Regional New South Wales, Minister for Small Business, Minister for Skills, and a member for Monaro. Thank you, John.
Well, thank you. And look, for me, facing tonight is one of the tough things you do as a local member. But I've always prided myself on turning up in the rooms that are tough, the rooms that you get to announce something that's quite nice for a community. And part of the reason of standing for 2019 is that I believe that you have a right to judge me on what I had said, what I've done, and the future going forward for this region. There's no question, in 2015 I was here in Bombala and I said I supported no forced amalgamations, and that was my position, and it still was, it still is. Unfortunately, that was, and I'm a member of Cabinet, when the decision was made to forcibly merge councils across the state. Was I happy? No, that's been documented, and if you read some of the Metro media, there was comments that I made about the Premier and the Minister for Local Government about a decision that they made, that the majority of Cabinet made, which I was part of and I had to accept. It didn't mean I was happy. It didn't mean I was happy. There's two things you can do in life when you're confronted by such a moment. You can give up and walk away, or you stay and fight. And I stayed and fought forward. I stayed and fought so that we make sure that if there is a merger here, that we actually get the best outcome for this community. That we get the promised outcomes, we get the promised benefits of a merged council. And that's always going to be a tough challenge. 2.5 years in, from almost 3 years I should say, since the merged councils, there's no question. There are issues that we haven't resolved. But when you're joining 3 organisations into one, there's going to be some significant issues that you have to deal with. And they are tough. The commitment that I made was that I'm going to have to stick this journey out. I'm going to have to work with everybody to make sure this is a success, because it was the only way we're going to get the outcome. Because at the end of the day, often people wonder who their councillors are, what the size of councils are, but the reality is for all of you, you're wondering about your rates, your water, your services, and your community. And I look back over the last 3 years and some of the decisions that I made, and remembering I ended up as leader of the National Party and Deputy Premier off the back of the Orange by-election, which local council mergers was the big issue. There's no doubt about it, and greyhounds. And we lost the leader of the National Party at the time, and I was elected unopposed as the leader of the National. The first decision I made was to stop any future mergers. So we pulled the ones that were out of the court. I said, clearly in the public domain, all forced mergers, those mergers are still stuck in the courts. If the Liberals want to have a government with me, they have to end, and they ended. But I had to make the toughest decision. What do we do with the merged councils? It would have been easy at the time to say, maybe we start a demerge process. But I remember talking to staff and community about the anxiety that we went through Fit for the Future about the future of mergers. This question mark that hung over councils for 3 or 4 years through a process to find out about viability and sustainability, dealing with the backlog of infrastructure costs, etc., right across all local government. And those reports are out there. KPMG, all the infrastructure reports, T-Corp from the government, clearly show the issues that councils were facing. And I think everyone recognised that. And so I had to make a decision then, do I push further with demergers? And I chose not to. Why? I chose not to. Why? And there was a point that I voted against a demerger bill from the shooters in the House. The reason I voted why not, because we had gone through the trauma and the anxiety, not just for community, but for the staff of council. And that is why I said, let's forge ahead with the best deal we could possibly get. And for the last 2.5, nearly 3 years, all we've done is committed to work with councils that were merged. That was my commitment that I would do that. And as the leader of the Nationals, when I forged the new relationship with the new incoming Premier, which was Gladys, I said that part of that is going to be additional funding for regional councils with a focus and priority on those merged councils. Over the last 2.5, 3 years, we've seen in excess of about $24 million into the former Bombala local government area boundary along with Delegate. $24 million, $15 million being the big one in relation to dealing with the water issues for Bombala and Delegate. And since then there's a list of investments for community projects right across from roads to community projects to make sure we remain and had a future. Supporting the business chamber, making sure we've got a vibrant business district. They're the things that I hung around to make sure that we didn't lose sight of. That those benefits that we were promised actually were realised. And it's very hard after 2.5 or 3 years to say, are we on a journey for success? And I think Andrew Thaler touched on it. We don't know. And the reality is that these things take 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 years, possibly 10 years. In 2004, it was the Labor government then that forced amalgamations in the state, but had no financial support. No financial support to those councils. I wanted to make sure that if we're going to go through this journey and this pain, that there was financial support. And I look back over the last few years, there's been that financial support to the councils and costs, financial support in relation to the projects that you probably all wanted to deal with. The opportunity to spend $15 million on water, to get it right, not just for today, but for the future, for the generations to come. To build the infrastructure, like the announcement around the swimming pool, to enclose it, almost $1.5 million. To make sure again we didn't lose sight of the needs of our community. I think the greatest question mark was about representation, and you had 3 elected to the council. I think that is the question that we have to ask going forward. If we don't demerge, do we go to a ward system that guarantees the people of the former Bombala local government area and delegate area a voice, permanently, forever, without question? Maybe that's the question we'll have to ask. But right now, I'm going to be absolutely honest with you. I have no plan, and the Premier has no plan for demerging of councils. Why? Because we don't believe now is the time. And you'll get to judge me on the 23rd of March. When I said that I didn't support mergers and forced amalgamations of council, I meant it in 2015. It would be wrong for me to come today here and say that we somehow, if you let us go through another couple of years, we may have a demerger proposal. I can tell you right now, this government hasn't got a demerger proposal. I'd rather be honest with you, and you get the chance to judge me on everything that I've said and done. Judge me as the local member, and that's why I'm facing 29, and you have every right to judge me. But I'll look back at my track record of delivery and working with community, and that's the best I can offer you tonight. But I do encourage you to continue on with the petition and your process. Because there was a comment made earlier. For those councils that went down the legal process, when I was elected as leader and became Deputy Premier, I was at least able to intervene there and make a decision to stop any future regional councils being merged. So You have the democratic process to pursue this and to go forward. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Firstly, it was remiss me earlier on. We had a couple of apologies, one from Bob Stewart, who's actually at the council meeting tonight. Frankie Seymour, the Animal Justice Party, Bob G from the Save Tumbarumba Shire, Will Tuck from the Save Our Councils Coalition, and Professor Brian Dollery from the University of New England at Armada. Is there any other apologies, Penny, that you'd like to record? Anne Maslin. One of the councillors. There's a council meeting on tonight. Yeah, Bob told me that. Any other apologies from the floor? No, thank you. Yes, sir. Carolyn Murray. Get that one? All right, we'll open for questions. So if we can keep the questions, and we want to stick to questions, not statements. We can all get, as I said right at the start, we can all get patriotic and on our high horse, but we're not here to make statements. We're here to ask questions of the 5 candidates. You've heard them speak. You've heard them be straightforward to you. If we can keep the questions not personal and just straightforward as to what the process you see or what the process you want to happen, that's the best way we can go forward. And we'll get some results and get some answers that way if you see your questions.
Who's first? Gentlemen, we'll start down here. We'll go the long one first. Just, first of all, if you could just state your name and the area you live in, and then address the question either to all the candidates or an individual candidate if you wish.
It's Chris Philbrick, I live in Bombala. The question I have is John Barilaro. I'm neither pro nor con the merging of the councils. But one of the things I do ask you is that I come from a background of project management, and the budgets I've handled have been probably 5 to 10 times what this council has. Has there been any plans to do an actual review of the outcomes? Because certainly from my point of view is that they have not achieved the outcomes of improved services and lower costs to ratepayers. So do you have a plan to have a formalised review of the implementation?
So can we just clarify that, please? So
We're talking about outcomes of the current council, the new council.
Outcomes of the
Merged council, right? Thank you.
John?
Yeah, thank you. Part of the policy originally is that those councils that were merged, that after 4 years there would be a review, and that will have to still continue. We made that commitment back then. It might have been 3 years. I'll come back and confirm it. At the 3 or 4 year mark, was it 3? The 3 year mark, there was a review. So there will be a review from local government New South Wales in relation to those merged councils, and to see if the benefits have, as I touched on earlier, have been fulfilled. I can get you further information to confirm that and what that process will look like.
Everyone, I'm Jack Cuttle. I come from the beautiful Creewall Valley. My question is to all the candidates. If we get to the stage of plebiscite, will all the candidates honour the result, and in what time frame?
We'll start at the end. We'll start at that end first with John, right through. John's made it pretty clear.
Well, I'm not putting up the offer of a plebiscite, so I can't answer that.
I think absolutely there'd be no point in having a plebiscite without honouring it. Realistically, my party's not going to be in government, but we may well have sway in the upper house. I would have thought, at the same kind of time frame as the administration period, year and a half, something like that.
This is a complex space, but like I mentioned in my opening address, we will legislate, if we get the support in the upper house, to ensure that the local government minister actually accepts the result of that plebiscite, and then start implementation afterwards. Note, even I think in Queensland, the local government minister had a bit of discretion. We want to remove that discretion so that if people go through that, then they'll get the result that they've voted for. Noting, of course, that actually, if everything's on the table, there may be people that don't support it, but what will be the result will be the result.
Yeah, my answer is quite simple, is that if I'm representing you, if I get that opportunity, and there's a majority voting a certain way, I have to represent that majority. That's my job. I would suggest there's a lot of, there'll be a lot of hurdles, not a case of just making it happen. There'll be a lot of hurdles, but you do need that strong voice, that person to represent you, to push that point forward, and I would certainly do that.
The power of an independent, if this electorate chose me, is that any government tries to form requires the assistance of those independents on the crossbench for its legislative pathways. So if you wanted to demerge, that is exactly what the government, whichever colour it ended up being, would have to undertake to get my support. There's one thing that I would suggest that you consider, because I've been thinking about it and talking about it. At the moment, under the Labor model, the trigger for the demerger vote is a 51% majority. And I wonder if it might not be better as a 66% majority hurdle, because then you don't have 49% of the people arguing against it and 51 arguing for it. It's a bit of a clearer majority. So I'm not saying that that is the actual fixed number, but it's an important part of the discussion. Hit your 10% and then set out the terms. But a 2/3 or 3/4 majority is something you cannot, within your community, argue with.
Thank you. Fine with the answers. Next question.
I'm Wayne McLean. I've moved down from here from Queensland, from Moranny. In Queensland we had 58 merged councils. Of those 58 councils merged, there's 38 of them demerged. That was before all this palaver went on down this way. Now, was there any studies done to say that this would be benefit Bombala? Yes, there was. KPMG put out a study and they were against it. 52% of the people in Bombala voted against the merged council. We were ignored. So, you know, our views on politicians are not all that great. And as you said, Mr. Barilaro, no, I'm just stating the thing, and I think that's about...
We don't want to go to any statements. If you haven't got a question, we'll go to the next person.
So, Steve Goodger, Bombala. I'm a former councillor, so I'm fairly familiar with the whole process. Just a question, I guess, to all of the candidates. Maybe John can't answer it because he's not in support of a demerger, but should a plebiscite be successful, then is there a commitment from all the candidates that do support it to assist with funding to go through with the demerger? Because there was obviously assistance to go the other way to merge, and that was a considerable amount of money. So if we go down that path of demerge, there's going to be a considerable amount of money required again to go down that path. So is there a commitment from all the other candidates that don't, that want to go down that and support that demerge process? Is there a commitment for funding for that? Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Thanks for your question, Stephen. Can I just ask you to elaborate on a bit? It was mentioned with one of the speakers previously that there was an audit that is required, so we'd like to know the cost of that audit. Then there's a plan, then there's the demerger process. So there's 3 steps, and it'd be nice to know the cost of each of those steps along the way.
Yeah, well...
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, so I understand the question, and I'm in total agreement. As I said, any government that tries to form, and I'm agnostic as to which government that might be, as the independent, the conditions are the people say what they want, and the government has to accommodate. Now, the amalgamation has happened, and of course it will cost money to undo it. The theory being, if we have this analysis that John mentioned in a year or two's time, when we find out that the answers are all negative, then possibly demerging will save money in the long run. So sometimes you will just have to own up to the problem, spend the money, and fix it so that the people are happy. Because if the people are happy, then they'll be productive and they'll make lots of revenue for tax.
It's actually disappointing to me that you know, we've ended up in this situation. It's going to cost money, and I think you know, as a candidate, if I was representing you guys, you know, in that position, I would have to try and find a way forward that's amicable for all parties. So I would push hard, certainly. But again, I just shake my head when I think about the enormous amounts of money that have been assumed to be gobbled up by the current system anyway. Is in the big picture, it's probably going to work out better for us if we go that way, in my mind. Yeah, look at all the money that's getting thrown around right now, like pork barreling. You know, there you go.
There's no easy answer in a way, but there is a clear process. If we have the plebiscite, that'll trigger. Shadow Minister Primrose talked about a boundaries commission, for a lack of a better term, but effectively a panel to look at the current council. That's funded. So getting all the information on the table, that won't be any problem. There's an Office of Local Government. Funding the plebiscite, it's Peter's view that should be done best case by the New South Wales Electoral Commission, and there is funding. I'm sure government will be able to find that, and we'll lobby for that. And then when all that's on the table, it is very difficult from opposition to get deep detail onto what a council's function is, to see over the next 1 year, 3 years and 5 years where you end up. What cash reserves sit in the council, how would those cash reserves, if they are there, how would they be divided up, and then what support from government would be. But I'd be very sure I'll be taking forward things as a local member to get that sort of support if required. But it could be, on balance, actually, a net gain for the community to take that step forward.
Thank you. My prepared answer is to bang the table and say that they spent hundreds of millions merging these councils against the wishes of the communities. But actually, I'm on the inside, and you can have a very easy, simple model to begin with, which is just you have your elected councillors back and you gradually demerge over a period of time, but you will have your representation, you will have your voice, and in this area you would have your 3 councils. I hear Russell's question about the cost of the audit and so on. I think that's describing the current model of going to the Boundaries Commission. I don't think it's describing a proposed model of having a plebiscite, perhaps at the same time as a council election, in which case the plebiscite is basically free because all the infrastructure of the council election is already happening. But I believe you could actually go at it very simply by re-electing your elected councils. Obviously, perhaps I've got a little bit of a conflict of interest there as one of those former people, but I do believe that would give you your local representation, and then they can work on the demerger. Am I passing it right?
I'm just trying to get some clarification to Steve's answer. I think Steve, I'm trying to put words in Steve's mouth here, but I think Steve's looking for 100% commitment that everything will be paid outside of council. That's what he's actually looking for. And today we haven't heard that from anyone apart from, oh yes, government may pay for it. So Steve's sort of asking, is there a commitment across the table from the 4 people who say yes, we'll go down that they'll commit 100% of government money to the demerger costs?
I make this point everywhere I go. Ratepayers are taxpayers. It's the same money. So whether it's the state government spending the money or it's the council spending the money, it's still your money, my money. So it makes no difference. If the state government pays, it's tax money that you've paid. If the council pays, it's rate money that you've paid. Of course, you would rather it be paid by the state government because it makes you feel better that it's not your council paying. At the end of the day, it is the people of New South Wales who will pay. Of course, I will make sure that that money will be spent, but I make the point that it doesn't matter anymore who spends it, it's the outcome that matters.
As I've said before, I would push hard to support that. But too many politicians get up and make promises and they don't keep them anyway. So I would certainly be pushing, and I'm not going to make a promise that I can't guarantee. So I'm not going to go down that path of telling stories that I can't stick to. But what I can tell you, and what I will promise you, is I'll be pushing for fair compensation to set council up again. You would need to get back to where you were. And I'll be pushing hard for that.
Unfortunately, there's no simple answer for me tonight, and I'm going to take the same angle as Mick here. There is not a, you can't whip up an ERC decision, and we do not know actually what you're trying to cost it. That is the reality of the complexity we're unpicking, except it is possible. Let's step right back. One of the challenges is you get right down in the weeds, and people think, oh no, hang on a minute, it's about cost 4 years down the track, whatever, I might go forward. Look, I get that, you want to get the full picture. But you can also take a bigger step. We had a council that was functioning, it was in the black, There was a town meeting that said it wouldn't happen. It happened, and there's an opportunity to go down a pathway to have a look. I think that's where I'll leave it there.
If you're looking for a short answer, I think the answer is yes. I think my party's policy is yes. And there's a few stadiums that don't need to be built or don't need to be knocked down that can fund it.
Next question.
Sorry, it's me back again. Mr. Barilaro, in light of recently released figures which have shown that merged councils are failing, they're in debt, they're not fulfilling promised outcomes, can your government revisit the amalgamation issue and allow councils a plebiscite or allow councils to demerge, and whether they want a plebiscite or a demerging, still to revisit amalgamation? If it's not working, then you have to go and have a look and see whether it can be fixed. What is the reason for your government's intransigence on this issue?
Well, I think I explained in my address the anxiety that we've caused over a 4-year period leading into the mergers, and then the mergers itself, the anxiety that causes community in relation to service delivery, and the anxiety it causes staff. And that's why we've decided that we're not going to pursue with a demerger. What I have said is we do have to evaluate what are the mergers and what's happening with local government across the state regardless. Local government is struggling right across the state. Merged or non-merged councils are struggling with viability because of the rate base. And rate income will never be sufficient enough as we continue to meet the needs of community. Completely. Communities are expecting more services and more infrastructure from their local government, but the revenue that local government receives through either funds or grants from state and federal government, plus your rates, isn't sufficient long term. We know that, the studies have proven that. The truth here is that we actually need a plebiscite, but it's actually constitutional recognition at a federal level. If we wanted to see local government recognised for the first time as a third tier of government, you actually have to be recognised in the Constitution. Right now, local government is only an instrument of the state government. You actually aren't recognised in the Constitution. And we've been promising by federal governments past that we would look at constitutional recognition of local government. If that plebiscite was to be achieved, what that then means is that you're entitled to tax revenue like all levels of government. And that in turn would be the only way local governments would be viable long term. You may be having this debate today like we had the debate in 2004 for mergers that happened under a previous government. We've had those mergers again under our government. We own it. And in 10 years, 20 or 30 years' time, we'll be revisiting the issue around local government viability unless we change the funding model. And the funding model cannot be rate-based, especially in regional New South Wales. It has to be from taxes, and the only way you'll get that is constitutional recognition.
I just want to make a very quick comment to that. Just finding where I highlighted it before in the previous. The scary thing about what John has just said is that if you look at the model that he just proposed with the constitutional recognition of local government, then you could end up with another tax on your income, be your company or your wages. Because that's what he effectively just said, is that they could then tax like the state and like the federal government. And I reject that. I think there's more than enough tax being taken from us now. It's more the question of competence in how that tax is spent. And yes, that is a political discussion that we continually have, and it goes to and fro. But the idea of using constitutional recognition of local government as the thin end of the wedge to ultimately result with local government taxing businesses as well as GST or a tax on turnover or wages tax, that scares me, and I think that should be ultimately rejected by all ratepayers and by all residents.
Yeah, if I can make a simple comment, I'm sure all of you would agree with me. I spoke about bureaucracy, and we're talking about, Mr. Barilaro said that, councils can't survive on their own, and yeah, we'd all agree that that's the case right now. But I'm pretty sure that rural people particularly would see the wastage of government. And as a businessman myself, I say there's two ways to make money: earn more or spend less. And it's those simple approaches that I really like about the party I've associated with myself with. You know, let's keep it simple. Let's get rid of some of this bureaucracy, and maybe you move back to where you had it, where you were doing okay, keeping your head above water is probably not a bad way to go. So you've got my support.
I won't get into the debate over finance of local government, so...
There's been any cross shifting, has there? No.
Lady over there, yep.
My question's probably for Mr. Barilaro. I'm Jan Ingram from Delegate, and while we're very grateful for the grant monies that we've been receiving, being in a small area, we do have problems trying to raise money to do things that we want done in the community. What we are concerned about is the waste, and I can relate with what Mr. Holton said regarding the cost of the RF sheds. We've had so many consultants come to Delegate, and to me, it's just a waste of money. We've had put in grants from our community organisations. We've received money. We've been able to do what we wanted with that money, and I think we've done very well with what we have done. And we just feel that we could make the money go a lot further if we didn't have the council administering the things, the projects. There's some, yes, they may have to do, but the little things that we want done, I think we could do ourselves, and we could make the money go a lot further.
I take that as a bit of a statement, and I'll ask John to reply in a sec, but if I could just cut short a bit the comment. So, depending on the amount of the value, it has to go through a tender process. Local government can't spend money above a certain level unless it goes through a tender process. That tenderer must be approved on a panel, so therefore, I find it one of the dysfunctions, and I agree, and John might be able to answer it, and I'm probably going to throw one out of left field for him, is that a lot of local contractors get left out of that because they don't want to go through the tender process, because a bloke from Delegate may only ever get a tender once every 6 years to go through, so therefore he just want to go through all the rigmarole of government tender, and it cuts out local government. It's probably off the subject of where we're going to be, but perhaps John, as Deputy Premier and Minister for Regional Australia, can probably just give you a quick answer about it. But it is a complex situation, and money has to be spent and accounted for properly, so it has to go through a definite process.
I think there's no question, firstly, that local government can deliver at a more efficient level than state or federal government. That I admit now straight away, because I think local government is able to stretch the dollar further. But there is always some criticism that local government also has a range of red tape and inefficiencies. And that's why a lot of our grant funding, especially in the regional growth area, a lot of the grant funding go directly to community groups. And I know in Delegate you've received some directly. And I've seen Rotary clubs, Lions clubs, community groups, action groups deliver infrastructure quicker, more efficient. Why? Because you get buy-in by community. You need a local tradie, you'll throw in a cheaper rate, the local suppliers will help out. So there is absolute merit that more funding should go directly to community groups, but that's a bigger picture. The point was made that local government, state and federal have procurement processes that limit what you can or cannot do with your funding. And the process itself is actually quite expensive and a lot of red tape. But in New South Wales, just to answer your question, the state government has changed a lot of its procurement processes up to contracts to $1 million, that once a tenderer, a contractor has been pre-assessed, doesn't actually have to go through that whole process. It's something that we have to roll out further, and we could do more with local government. But right now, a lot of funding is going to local government because of the audit process required to justify your tax dollars being spent accordingly. But we do have a mix in this state where we fund community groups and we fund councils in different types of funding models.
More questions?
Could I, as a serving councillor on the Merged Council, could I address some of that? It's not actually contradicting or arguing.
Anyone can reply.
Thank you. So your point, I've actually seen that on the inside. The grant money that's being spent, a lot of it is going on consultants, and they're panel consultants, so there aren't tenders going out, and the locals are locked out of it. I think one of the other things that we've also seen in our Merged Council is a loss of called corporate knowledge. So local staff have left, they've taken voluntary redundancies, And so the new organisation, the new council, is having to get consultants in because the staff doing the jobs don't know the times. So in Braidwood, there's been 500,000 of the Stronger Communities Fund, which is what I call the merger bribe, has been allocated for beautification in Braidwood. As far as I can tell, not 1 cent of that has been spent doing anything other than paying for consultants, except a sign went up about 3 or 4 months ago and I got it taken down because it was horrible. So yes, there's a lot of inefficiency going on there, but I think some of that's come out of the merger and the loss of, in my council, the loss of the local staff and the local knowledge as well.
I didn't know we were standing, but I might as well. I'll just say, at a local level, take it right back down. I'm a 5-year PNC president, a 4-year president, 5 years on the PNC. We used to be able to build our own things in the school. We had a relationship with a local contractor. New South Wales government changed the rules, procurement rules. Anything over $5,000, we have to now go through a panel provider. It's cost us a lot of time, a lot of energy. I know it's actually probably frustrated many in the room. It's an example, it has to change. If I'm the member for Monaro, I am going to go after how we can have a more risk-based approach at a local level. I know it's easy to say, but we really should be able to get to a point where if you've delivered before and you have a track record for delivery, like the Delegate Progress Association or people in Delegate, then there's more flexibility. If it's the first time out of the cab off the rank, then yep, fine. Tighter processes, but there's no risk-based approach in this, and it drives us nuts on the PNC as well.
Oh, I guess the only thing I'll say to that is that if something's broken, we need to fix it. Let's keep some common sense into this. We jump up and down about the bureaucracy, but no one's prepared to stand up and make a change. We know that as your representatives, in a parliamentary sense, if things aren't right, we can influence change. That's what we should be doing. So, yeah, let's work together to do just that.
John's got a pen and a paper in front of him. He can take some notes. The experience at Nimidaville recently with streetscapes, which is part of this funding, was that we had some community consultations. We set out what we wanted. The consultants went off and did some designs and designed the exact opposite of what we wanted. And then we called for another public meeting, which we had, and we pretty strongly said, this is what we said, and this is what we want. And then the council secretly let out a public tender to do the opposite of what we wanted. And this is ongoing. Now, I've done some very simple analysis. There has been more money spent on council time and consultants' time than there is actually in the bloody budget for the streetscape. The budget is 50,000 and they would have spent 120 on the consultant. So please, John, sit down with me and let me talk you through this. It is insane. It's council. It's not council, it's giving money to the council and saying deal with it. We don't want that anymore. I take your point. Give us the money and we will really do the right thing and have that trust. And this is the core point. We need to restore trust. Trust with the state, trust with the council, trust within the community. And these games that we see is an erosion of trust.
Thanks. We've got a bit off track there. I know everyone's got questions we can go down, but we're starting to go down the council bashing path and stuff like that, which we wanted to try and avoid. We want to get back to what the core agenda item was, and that was about the plebiscite and the possible plebiscite. So if we can we'll have 2 more questions, or we've got 2, one here and Steve again, and one over here. So we'll have those 3 questions and ask all councillors or candidates to answer wherever you want to go.
Does that have to run as far?
Robert Ingram Tombong, which is even further past Delegate. Yeah. And I had to engage 4-wheel drive after the glorious rain we've had to get here today. Point made. What I'd like to know, Johnny, is I agree with your point from the work that I've done around with the federal government trying to get activity through local government to improve a national program. Because of the lack of recognition of the local areas in the in the Constitution, it's a major problem. So what I agree with what you're talking about there in terms of, yes, we've got to look at that, but that is not going to happen anywhere in the near future. The review for this merger is coming up, what, in the next 6 months? So, you know, in 9 months' time, there's going to be an outcome from that review. If you were still in government and that review said this has been an abject failure, what are you going to do? I thought that's what you were going to ask, Tony.
I actually think that's a very good question. So right now, midstream, we don't know if it's a failure or if it's a success. There is a position that we'll have a review, and if that review was to come back to the merged councils, it has been a failure, then that is a question for the government of the day. But I'm not going to, again, pretend here, because I started today saying that the government's policy is no plebiscite. So I don't want to sit here today and say, yeah, I know, but if that review was to come back, we'd have to give it consideration. Of course we would, because the Auditor General would actually be looking at us and going, well, this was a policy, this was... I think the hundreds of millions of dollars have gone into a merger proposal or policy. We still have to justify that expenditure, and that expenditure will have to be justified through benefit or not.
So how would you engage an open consultative mechanism and process with the communities to rectify that?
Well, the question firstly is we'll have to wait for the review of local government, and that is at the 3-year mark or the 4-year mark. And like I said, I'll have to come back and give that firm commitment about what that date is. I can't answer beyond that. I really can't.
I just note very, very quickly, when I hear that, and I accept it, but I do think about all the reviews and everything that happened to date. I don't think the Fit for the Future report was ever released. The KPMG report, I understand, which may or may not be, I'm not sure how big it is, has never been out there. I mean, do we really believe in this room that there'd be a review that is really genuine and grassroots, and then they'd accept the argument? Anyway, I'll just leave it there. I don't think
I'll make one very important point, and I say this with respect, John. You are not the government, you are the member for Monaro, and these people here are your boss, and they're not happy. So if you're going to have a review, it's not going to be very difficult for John to say to his government people, we should incorporate the review and the plebiscite question at the same time, because that's what the people say, and that's what you're saying.
Thank you. My name is John Judge and I'm from Craigie. The question I was initially going to ask, and will still ask, was whether the various candidates here would ensure that a demerged council of Bombala would have to make do with the resources it now has, or whether it would have to rebuy the plant, which I understand has recently been sold. That's an important question, but John Barilaro raised what I think is possibly the most crucial question of the entire agenda. And because it's the most crucial question, it's almost never asked. And when it is asked, the general result, when it came up tonight, was it's too difficult, we can't do it. And the question concerns the fact that the amount of money that's being delivered to local governments is 1/3 to date from federal government tax revenues, is 1/3, last I heard, what it was in 1975. And that's 1/3 of tax revenues. And tax revenues are now a lower proportion of GDP they were in 1975 because we've had tax cuts. And because taxation or revenues have been removed from income tax to GST, which is a federal responsibility. Now, this is crucially important because it means we've got a smaller pool, income tax, from which we're taking our resources, and a smaller amount. Now, the question I was going to ask, and I've asked it several times recently, given that we will never solve the problem of revenue if we only have 1/3 of what we had in 1975, the question is, why don't you people who are part of political parties advocate for the federal government to go back to the sort of funding we had in 1975? And sorry, John, there is no constitutional problem because Gough Whitlam, you know, that uncouth Labor mongrel, actually found a constitutional justification for giving money to local governments directly to catch up with the backlog of infrastructure that have been left over from World War II. That's the background. That's the question you have to ask. What are you guys going to do with your party organisations and your councils to do something about the funding you are not getting?
All right, do you want to sacrifice your pension? Or do you want to help me get the multinationals to pay their fair share of tax? So the question of tax, and you mentioned that federal tax with GST. GST is divvied up to the states using the, I can't think of the name of it now, but there's a commission that divvies up on the basis of population and an equity measure. And that money from the states is then sub-delegated to local government in various ways. So the GST money does end up back in local council budgets. But the issue more broadly is how much tax are you willing to pay? And this is a question outside of the remit of tonight, but it's a question that we will face in the state election in March, and more importantly the federal election in May, if we get to May, without the government collapsing before then. The availability of tax is actually almost immeasurable, but the corporations, the large multinational corporations, are applying tax law lawfully and not paying tax. Exactly. And this is the question. It's not a question for us to deal with tonight, but in your ballot boxes in March and more appropriately in May, that is a better forum to address it. There is tax revenue available, but it's going to be a hard-fought battle.
Not a bit off the subject, and pretty quick and short.
Yeah, just real quickly. Look, at the end of the day, like I say, there's a lot of money wasted. When it comes to tax, I shake my head at regressive taxes like payroll tax and stamp duties. Certainly in my position, I'd want to understand how we can best represent you in that area. But growth in rural areas, to me, is the key. And we see a lot of policy that stunts that growth. So I think it's a complex question, and I think we need to spend a lot more time debating it and discussing it to really get a handle on where we're going. But that's probably all I've got to say. Thank you.
John, I love your passion. I think, do we have 7 graders or 6 graders across the whole, now before merged snowy Monaro Shire, and I think went down to 3 or 4. So yeah, it's part of the consideration of, making sure everything's on the table so when people vote, we think about what's done there. I'm not going to make any comments on taxation and multinationals, etc. I think I want to really bring it back down to why we're here. About the question of should this community, you are doing that, you are considering whether to start the plebiscite and kick that off. I am here tonight to say, if you want to go down that pathway, then it'll require a Labor government with a Labor local government minister, according to the 2 policies put on the table tonight.
If you want to talk about the graders, clearly any council that's divided up again has to divide up its resources. So any cash they got from it, any savings they've made, those have to be reallocated. In terms of council funding, the bigger picture, there is no constitutional problem, well there is, but they bypass it for federal government funding, local government, because they get it through the financial assistance grants.
Peter hit it right on head. The financial assistance grants that come from the federal government to the state government and then gets distributed to local government is the process. But so the federal government has an agency and a minister for local government, but they don't really look after local government. So there's a bureaucracy. Then they give it to the state, and it goes through our bureaucracy, and then we give that money to the council. And that's why constitutional recognition is important, because if you cut out that bureaucracy, because it gets straight from the feds to the local council, you cut out that inefficiencies. And that's why constitutional recognition is supported, and it was supported by all the major political parties leading into, I think it was the Rudd election, the second Rudd election, and because the election was called early, we never got the chance for plebiscite. Otherwise, we'd probably be having a different conversation today, because I think that would have got up.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. We'll call a stop to the questions there. I just have a couple of things to read out from a couple of support groups. The first one's from the SOCC message for the public meeting, which is Save Our Councils Coalition. There is nothing, and their message is, there's nothing easy about merging a council that no longer exists, but do not forget that Bombala had a good council with Bob Stewart as mayor. But like so many towns in New South Wales, these small councils no longer exist. They sit with a lot of other towns at the mercy of the bigger towns who have more councillors and a more powerful voice. These councillors decide what is good for you, not like when Bombala was independent and Bombala people mattered. You can be a standalone council again, but that depends on what the next government decides is good for you. Whether it's Labor, Greens, shooters, fishers and farmers, you can argue hard to demerge. You can say, we will vote for you, but you must support us in our fight to demerge. Make a fuss about it, go to Cooma with placards, inform the media, use the media. I wish I could be with you, but I am preparing an analysis of Amalgamated Council and how they are performing. The truth is they are financially well below where the predicted surplus should be. Instead of meeting targets, the state government prepared for them. Amalgamated Council statewide are a financial mess. Mrs Berejiklian has made a big mistake supporting IPED's policy. All councils who fought the government in court are now independent. I say to your community and those activists, get stuck in and fight the mergers and do it now. Good luck and keep fighting. That's from Will Tuck, the chairman of Save Our Councils Coalition. And the other one's from Doug G from the Save Tumbarumba Council. It's a pretty long one. I might make this a bit shorter than what he's actually said. I'm writing to express our support and encouragement to the Bombala community as it considers moving to have its former council reinstated following the forcible merger. The Save Tumbarumba Shire Group represents a majority of residents that feel disenfranchised and cheated of their democratic right by an undemocratic merger. A government that promised there would be no mergers. The plebiscite conducted at the time of the last council elections voted by 90% of eligible voters, recorded over 93% in favour of a demerger. We are happy to share our experience and offer some advice as your community considers its future. We offer some points to consider. Our experience and a number of studies have shown that the government mantra of bigger is better is a fallacy. In our case, a recent study by our Chamber of Commerce shows that our Snowy Valleys Council, in its own documents projects, projects deficits out to 2027-28, even with a 10% rate hike. Bombala will not be alone if it decides to push for the merger. There is a growing groundswell of communities that were forcibly merged that are mobilising, including Tumbarumba, Gundagai, Gyra, to name a few. At the recent local government conference, where all 160 New South Wales councils were represented, it passed a resolution by the 800 councillors. They're unanimous to support Tumbarumba and Gundagai and their communities in a demerger. And it just makes some other comments which are very similar along the lines of the Save Our Council group. So there you see. I'll call an end to the night. It's just summing up. If we could have a hand for all the 5 contestants over here. And most of all to you for your support of the Bombala community and for coming out. I have a few things that I think the committee should take on, and if I could just add those. I think that one of the key things is, and John and Bryce both touched on it, is how you go judging forward, whether it's a successful council, a merged council, and the indicators around that, who they're set by, and the financial indicators. I take personally, and it was only my personal opinion on our council, I totally disagree with the KPMG financial indicators as to whether you were fit for the future. I actually thought most of the actual indicators were total rubbish as to financial sustainability, especially in relation to operational costs and how that was. If you had a big project that come in and you actually contracted out, you didn't get any operational cost for it, even though there was an operational cost to the council for it. So that could rule you unfit for the future. So I think it's very important as you go forward as a group that you actually look at, and whoever your member may be after the election, you actually sit down with them and work out those indicators of what makes Bombala in the future a sustainable council. It's well and good to have the passion, but what's going to make it sustainable in the future? We've heard about, the funding issues right across the board, and at Bega Valley we're no different. We struggle to balance our budget every year, and our recurring maintenance is a real cost. Our financial assistance grants, which was frozen by the federal government for 10 years, is now back and getting indexation on it, which will be a big boost, which adds about 0.25% to that. But it needs to be recognised right across the board what that freezing did. It led to it about 1974. It's actually in the last 10 years that it's been frozen. And it was frozen by government and only just came back on by the current federal government. So there's all those sort of issues, and as a group you need to address those. it's well and good. I think, you know, that we're all patriotic, but unless we go with the cause, and do it in an appropriate manner as you've done tonight, and I congratulate you all for staying the course, and thank you. Very well done.
Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move that this meeting supports the collection of a petition to progress the demerging of the former Bombala Council from the Snowy Monaro Regional Council. May I have a seconder?
I wish to second that motion.
I don't think we need speakers for and against the motion. I'll just put the motion by a show of hands. Those for. Thank you. That's carried unanimously, I would say. A division. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. You can have the...
I would like to thank Russell very much for chairing this meeting. Because of his very firm hand, it has continued in a very civilised manner. I can congratulate all of you on also handling all of this in a very civilised manner. I think it's been a great discussion. I think the questions have been fantastic. And thank you very much for your unanimous support of us having a petition to bring about a plebiscite. We'll move forward from here, and with luck, we might get our council back. Thank you. Oh, thank you to the